Okay, we are live recording. So welcome to this wonderful panel event, which is called Worlds After Windrush. We are joined by three fantastic novelists, and we're going to be talking a little bit about some of their most recent work today. So joined with us today, we have Louise Hare, who's a London-based author, former student of Birkbeck University. This Lovely City is Louise's debut novel, and it kind of invites us to witness, I guess, a community who turn on a Windrush musician after an unexpected incident occurs. And that was published just over a year ago, if that's correct, Louise. Yeah. So welcome, thank you for being here. We also have Yvonne Bailey-Smith, who trained as a social worker and then became a psychotherapist. Yvonne was born in Jamaica before moving to England as a teenager, and as I understand it, is part of a very literary family. So welcome, Yvonne, it's lovely to meet you. The Day I Fell Off My Island is also Yvonne's debut novel. Yvonne, am I right in thinking that this was published just a few days ago?
Yes, it was published on the 10th of June.
Congratulations, it's beautiful.
Thank you very much, thank you.
So The Day I Fell Off My Island, as I said, is Yvonne's debut novel, and it introduces us to Erna, who's a Jamaican teenager who's forced to kind of leave behind her life in Jamaica to start afresh in London. And then finally, we have Leone Ross, who is a novelist, a short story writer, an editor, and a journalist. Leone was born in England, Coventry, is that right? Yeah, and then grew up in Jamaica. So I guess you and Yvonne took journeys going the other way from each other. And we're talking about Leone's most recent publication, This One Sky Day, which was published in the US as Poppy Show, wasn't it? That's the name there. And I guess it tells the story of love and life and loss in this fictional Caribbean archipelago called Poppy Show. So thank you so much for joining us today. I guess all of your books are really, really different. They're incredibly different, but they're also just incredibly immersive reads. And it was a real pleasure to kind of receive these books and be able to read them, and so be able to kind of talk to you about them today. But yeah, there are some themes that these books have in common with each other. And I'm thinking specifically about the ways in which you describe kind of community creation, community building, but also like world building, right? As well. And as I was reading through these books, you get a real strong sense of place in each of them. So all very different, but all stunning. So thank you very much for your books. So I guess my first question, and it's a question that I want to pose to all of you, is just what's the inspiration for these novels? Would you be able to kind of tell us a bit about the journey that led you to write your books? So could I start with Leone? Is that okay?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. This was a long time coming. I wrote 2 novels in the 90s in kind of rapid succession, within, I think, two or 3 years of each other, when I was young and in my 20s. And then I did a collection of short stories. I kind of devoted myself to the short story form for a while, and then came this novel. The first 2 novels were deliberately realist, concerned with very, I think they tried to be funny, and they tried to be accessible. They talked about love and relationships, but also very much, I felt like, and perhaps it was because I was in my 20s and 30s, very much like, need to show my feminist chops, need to deal with race issues, need to deal with my, so there are important social issues that I must address. So as a result, the work was quite realist, very contemporary. And then I began to have a word with myself about who I was as a writer. And that's where I think This One Sky Day came from. Slowly through short fiction, but eventually into this novel, I knew that I had to play around with the genre. I was a girl who loved horror, loved erotica, loved speculative fiction of all kinds, adored magic realism, loved the Latin Americans, loved when Caribbean writers played with magical realism. And so I think over a long period of time, I just gave myself permission to write a book that was unapologetically surrealist. So This One Sky Day is a book that takes place in, as you said, an archipelago that's completely made up, but based loosely on different Caribbean nations, particularly Jamaica, which is where I grew up, of course, where everyone has a magic ability. And that's perhaps the start of the way to understand the way that the novel works. And there's a hierarchy of magic in it. So you could be born with the ability to twist time around, which seems quite profound and complex, or you could be born with the fact that you will never in your life have any flatulence. So there is this kind of huge difference between people's different magical abilities, and that creates all kinds of social effects that I think are interesting. So it's using fantasy and magical realism to make important social points. So I think I'm just coming at it in a different way. So that's the impulse where it came from. I wanted to move closer again to the little girl that I was, who really liked magical films.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leone. Louise, how about you? What was the inspiration for this lovely city?
I've always been interested in writing historical fiction because it's a genre that I love to read, but obviously there aren't very many, you don't find very many Black protagonists in historical fiction. If you're lucky, there'll be a servant and something bad will usually happen to them. They'll get arrested or they'll die, or they'll get someone pregnant, and that's kind of their function in a lot of historical fiction that I was reading. And I was just really interested, especially, reading the works of people like David Olusoga and sort of exploring that past that I never knew when I was growing up. So actually the last thing I wanted to do was write something about Windrush, because I felt like that was the one thing that people knew about Black British history, was they knew about Windrush. But then I actually did a tour, it's about 5 years ago. You can do tours into sort of abandoned tunnels, like part of the London Underground network. And I did this tour, because I'm a bit of a geek, into the tunnels underneath Clapham South tube station, which I knew had been used as an air raid shelter during World War II. It's kind of why it has sort of been opened up to the public for that kind of period. And then when I got down there were pictures of Windrush passengers. And it turned out, I had never known this, that they actually used it for 2 or 3 weeks when, after the Windrush had docked, they didn't know what to do with these people that had arrived. And sort of was a bit of panic because they hadn't been prepared. So they were like, oh, we've got this air raid shelter. So they had the bunk beds already there for the infrastructure. They got volunteers to bring food down. And that was where they kept people. And then obviously they moved to Brixton. That was the nearest Labour office, which is obviously how Brixton became the hub of that community. I was just fascinated. And then a few months later, I started doing my master's in creative writing. And I wrote a short story about a guy called Laurie, his first day in London. I'm just thinking, I've made a terrible mistake. Why did I leave Jamaica? This is horrendous. I don't like, they basically put me into hell, going down this sort of helter-skelter staircase. All you can hear is the tube trains. But the sort of feedback in the class was, this isn't a short story. Like, what happens? We need to know what happens to Laurie after this. So it was a matter of sort of piecing together. Mo, the main character, Evie, was sort of a notes in a notebook that I was trying to figure out like a story around. And actually, when I put the two together, it kind of worked. So yeah, it was kind of a mistake, but it worked.
Yeah, I would say it worked very well. That's a really interesting piece of history as well, just about the fact that they used these shelters to also house people who came off the Windrush. I hadn't known that before, so that's really interesting. And interesting also that I guess it ties to this history of Caribbean people in Brixton, and it's something also that comes up in your book as well, Yvonne. I think there's a passage where Erna talks about Brixton and how she loves being in Brixton, right? So yeah, over to you, Yvonne, I guess. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the inspiration for your book?
Not at all, thank you. And I have to say that I cannot wait to read both of your books. And that's something, Louise, that I did not know. This sounds really interesting. Thank you for that. So my book, I think like Leone, the inspiration for it goes back quite a long time. I think I was in my 20s when I first thought about writing this book. I didn't quite know how it would take form. I've always scribbled and I've always read, and I've always written. But all kinds of things got in the way, such as having children and having to work for a living and stuff like that. So that's why it has only just arrived. But I think it came, mine was really about something about hearing children's voices.
Right.
And I became very curious. As a young woman, I started out life working in community and youth work. And I worked in pretty much all of the youth centres in Brent, which is a borough I lived in. I still live in this borough. And in the centres, we would encounter a lot of quite problematic behaviours amongst some of the young people. And a lot of those young people were young Black people. They would get into fights in the club. They would go outside. They would be threatening each other. Not all of them. I don't want to generalize in any way or shape about our young people, but, it was a significant numbers of people. And we'd just go out and we'd sort them, we'd there were no knives, no guns in those days. So it's just go up and, come on guys, girls, stop this. But I got to thinking about what some of that might be about. And then as I grew myself, I was much older than these young people. As I grew myself, I began to think about my journey and some of these young people's journey and the impact of migration on young children, and who do they get to talk about their experience with? Because obviously, my parents, for example, and any of you who've had parents who have migrated from the Caribbean and anywhere else, they've come. Some of them may not have particularly wanted to come, but they know why they were coming. It may not have worked out for many of them, but they were coming to make a better life for themselves and for their family. For children, particularly young children, you were just joining your parents. You didn't have a say in the matter. And I'm sure some children were very excited about it. Some children, like me, was not at all excited about it. I really wanted to remain in my Jamaica with my family, with my friends, with everything I know. So Ernest channels, or I channel Ernest's story, or vice versa, in ways. So I really wanted. I thought, that kind of movement, I think, for people causes trauma. I use that word not lightly, and it needs to be talked about. And Louise, you've talked about the Windrush generation. Of course, we're hearing much more these days about the Windrush generation. I came right at the end in '69, like my character. But nobody really talks about the generations of children who came after. Yeah. And I wanted to give voice. And some of the things I play around in the book with, for example, is like the grandmother, giving voice to this grandparent who has brought up her grandchildren and they're removed. And I thought, I wonder if my grandmother kind of had that voice, I wonder what she would say. I mean, I wanted to give her some passion, and so all of that, is just taking on board the fact that people, we're psychological beings. Everybody's thinking, so even if parents haven't got to discuss with children, and children haven't got to discuss with parents, we're all live thinking people, and these stories are there and they need to be told. But I wanted to tell the story in a way that I suppose was strategic. I didn't want to write any kind of misery memoir. I wanted to write something that was balanced, and to give voice, but also say these children are not victims. Black people, I think, have shown for generations that we are really powerful. We live all kinds of horrendous stories, and as Angela says, but still we rise. And that's the sort of thing I wanted to get across in my book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yvonne. I've been long interested in they call them barrel children, don't they? So the children of migrant parents who get left behind, right? And so what happens to those children when they're left behind, but also what happens when their parents pay for them to join them, So I found Ernest's story just to be incredibly touching, this idea of her just being so happy with her grandparents and fulfilled in this life that she's living, and then all of a sudden just to be torn away from this country. She's on this day that she falls off this island, to be brought to this new country, which in so many ways is regarded by children at this point as like being the motherland, right? But it's just entirely foreign. So I really, really appreciated the story, and particularly like it being from like a child's point of view as well.
And of course, I play with the idea of the perfect grandparents. Of course, there's no such thing. But I think children do. It's a bit like when a marriage breaks up and one parent goes off, and the child is living with actually probably quite sensible parent, but the child then sort of completely adores the absent parent, maybe even the abusive parent. But of course, in Ernest's story, the grandparents are not at all abusive. But I think what I wanted to really show is the power, that those kind of transitions have on everybody. It's not just impacts the children; it impacts the people who have become the parents of the children, who are parenting the children. It impacts the relationships that they're going to join on many levels in their new countries.
I think it's a really complex psychological space, isn't it, Yvonne?
Yes.
One of the things that we're very good at as a community, and again, I don't want to generalize, but one of the things we're very good at as a community is kind of getting on with it, trying to remain strong and pragmatic, while, serious traumas are happening to us and our little ones. Not, and often doing our very best as parents and grandparents to care for our children, but then it being harder to find a space of, fix up, you have to be strong, you can't be weak. And the reason I think certainly my mother and my grandmother and women of that generation who were Windrush generation would have been perhaps wanting us to be quite strong and tough is because we're facing such traumatic experiences. I mean, when I came back, I was born here in Coventry, went to Jamaica, came back when I was 21. Now, I'd been going back and forth all the way through because my father remained here. My father's British. So I had a sense. But I say that only because when I finally came back at 21, I felt weird.
Exactly.
Culture shock nearly lit me for 6. It was so hard to find a space for myself within Black community, within British community. And I don't mean that I wasn't welcome, the Black community. Yes. Hey, how are you doing? And I was so glad to be part of it. But the layers of, and this is true for anyone, the layers of moving country. And these are things that our generation, Windrush generation and down, have had to deal with.
Yes.
Trying to take care of our children in this context. And, it's hard, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And writing about it, I think, is so important. And also I've read only 10 pages of your book, Yvonne, but I'm very much looking forward to exploring both of your works, because I think these are such important things for us to talk about in the community. And as you say, not just as misery memoir, but just
absolutely. There's enough of that.
Yeah.
I think it's about addressing the complexities. Absolutely. And I think I said to one interview before, I think I very much feel like I stand on the shoulders of the generation, my mother's generation, who came before me. I would never say that those people didn't do anything. They did so much. They also were voiceless. They suffered. So many of them suffered so much indignity, and I don't know how they got through it. I don't know how they got through it. And in terms of Windrush, now come to this point where these people have lived here for 60, some of them, more, 70 years of their lives, to be told that actually you still don't belong. You don't have the correct papers. You need to go back to where you came from. It's absolute madness.
But Yvonne, do you remember a phrase that they have in Jamaica, which I imagine might be familiar to you, which is that thing that people say,
the Bengal.
You go to England and you turn mad?
Yes.
And I used to hear that phrase when I was a little girl and not quite sure what was it. And I'd even hear it in the context of my kind of half Britishness and be like, I don't know what that means. It's when I got back here and I began to watch the many layers of receipt of this community for us in Indian communities and other immigrant communities, of course, and began to see the levels to which this thing could and can mad us.
Absolutely.
It's
many, multi-layered.
I mean, one of the things that I do in my novel, I mean, on one level, it may seem like it's a kind of not very, very natural link, but something does occur to me that is important. One of the things I've done explicitly by creating this kind of whole new magical world is I've kept immigration and its complexities out. And I've managed to just about, colonialism has affected the country because part of its history is that, so it was kind of Amerindian peoples originally in Poppy Show, and then a group of like 203 ex-slaves after emancipation the leader of them, when he's emancipated, his Irish father, white father, gives him the deeds to this land and says, well, I cannot claim you as my own, you know, because of course he raped his mother, right? And he's not wanting to claim this slave boy, this mixed boy. But he said, I can give you this deed to this land so you can go and claim it. Now, this is not even a land he, the father, had ever gone anywhere near, because I knew that through research that, you know, the British Empire just walked around claiming things all the time. Gosh. And then these deeds were passed down through history like it's nothing. You know, you pass it to your child and no one has seen it. So this former slave sets off with 202 other people to go and claim Poppy Show, right? Which didn't even have a name when he got there. And when he reaches there and meets the original Amerindian people, which to my mind are kind of like Taino people, like Arawak people, they just look at him like he's mad. They're like, what do you mean a piece of paper gives you the right to come into our place and take it? But nobody owns the earth. What are you talking about? So there's this big culture clash. What ultimately happens is that the formerly enslaved do come into the community and eventually become part of it. But what they also let in is all of the toxicity of colonialism, all of the specific toxicity of kind of toxic Christianity, and it doesn't completely take over the country. But what I'm trying to say is just a sniff of colonialism, a sniff of the experience, the trauma that the slaves have had, then goes on to affect this island so very much that prior to that was free.
Yes.
And like the Poppy Show, people are very proud. They'll say things like, no, Poppy Show never have no slave in Poppy Show. And there haven't been slaves in Poppy Show. There have been emancipated slaves in Poppy Show, but still the slaves, and I enjoyed this irony, the freed slaves bring with them old colonial ideas and expectations and statements. So the reason I bring that up is because it is about cultures clashing and meeting and colliding and what happens. But also wanting to, as a writer, escape from throwing that on its head, look at it in different ways. You know?
Yeah, thank you for all of your thoughts, Dan. I'm just thinking about, I guess, the difficulty of defining home when you are a child of diaspora, right? And I think that this is perhaps something that comes out in all of these books is what does home look like? And when you're not entirely sure what that home looks like, how then do you compensate? And you compensate by these communities that you build, and that these communities get built in different ways in your books. We were talking just about Windrush, and I guess I know Yvonne and Louise, the ideas for your books, the inspirations for your books, they came before the Windrush scandal in 2017. So Yvonne, you said this has been an idea that's been in your head for a long, long time. And Louise, you talked about the tour you went on about 5 years ago. But obviously, I guess, given that the Windrush scandal that's happened, your books take on, I guess, like a new kind of relevance. They become almost even more important. And I'm interested in, for all of you, just about what you would say to, I guess, the importance of, do you think that the scandal has kind of increased our need to hear stories from and about the Windrush generation? I know, Louise, you said that at the beginning you didn't want to write a Windrush story because it is, there are a lot of people who are under the misconception that Black British history starts in 1948, right? Which is
exactly the 20th century. Never mind,
exactly. It's just nonsense. But so even though this moment, this 1948 moment, is so important, and even though it's perhaps one of the moments in Black British history that most people know about, that, do you still think that there are just kind of a wealth of stories about that Windrush era that haven't been told? Are there still stories that are worth exploring? I'll start with you, Louise, if that's okay.
Yeah. So, so what was really interesting was obviously I was working the whole time that I was writing this lovely city, and so obviously all my work colleagues knew that I was writing, and they're like, oh, you know, what are you writing? So I said, oh, it's this thing. It's kind of like Windrush era, because I figured everyone would understand. Everyone's like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And then the scandal happened just as it was about to go on submission to publishers. Suddenly, I was the work sort of the person to go to at work if you wanted to know about Windrush, because it turned out nobody knew what Windrush was. So I'd always thought that it was something that everyone knew. And I thought, I thought I'd learned it at school. And it was later that I realized that my parents must have taught me this, because actually when I thought about it, school, we did like the Romans, World War II, you know, that kind of sort of very standard, you know, British history. So actually, even though I hadn't wanted to write about this period, I ended up being kind of glad that I had. And I think it was quite shocking. And people like my publishers that hadn't heard about Windrush until the scandal, and they're like, "Oh, you've written this book, and it's odd." And who lived in Brixton, walked past Windrush Square, and just thought it was a nice name for a like. So I was quite shocked. Please go for more stories, because it turns out nobody knew about it until a few years ago.
You can see from my expressions, Louise, how.
Well, this was me also. I was like, what did you think I was talking about when I said I'm writing a Windrush book? That obviously just didn't care or were interested. So yeah, didn't do a lot for my ego. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely scope. I love to write stuff further back. I'm researching for some things set in a sort of more Georgian period and looking at slavery on the streets of London, which I think people need to pretend didn't exist. My next book set in 1936 and looking at someone who's passing. Because one of the things that really, I'm just obsessed with watching everything that David Olusoga does on TV. And one of the things that really sort of stood out for me when I was watching his Black and British show, and actually a different historical show that I watched, is when you trace the relatives of these characters who lived in, say, London in Victorian periods and earlier, their descendants are all white, because obviously they had, you know, there weren't enough Black people, so everyone sort of married, you know, had white partners. And so I was really intrigued in this idea of passing, which is something that you come across with quite a lot in American literature. Again, we don't have, or we don't think we've got that culture in the UK, but we do. It's just that people don't realize, because it's been, like, I was watching something about the composer, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and they spoke to one of his descendants, and he had always known there was this really famous musician in his family, but he was an adult until he found out that his ancestor was Black. And so it was just never talked about it. It was, you know, oh, your great grandfather or whatever played at Royal Albert Hall, but there was never any mention of the fact that, you know, his father was from Sierra Leone, and he had lived in Croydon and been racially attacked, and, you know, all that kind of thing. So I think there were lots of different stories that I'd love to see told, but yeah, Windrush is more obscure than I realised.
I think that really it continues to upset me for the whole of Britain, really, because look at how long we have been here, and look at how many contributions we have made, and look at how you really can't begin to even tear apart the culture of Britain anymore without us there. And yet there are, of course, there are many good people who, we know that. Let's take that for granted, that Britain is full of good people who we love and admire and who we make family with and all of those things, right? But the fact that people can not only continue to be so ignorant about our history and the history of immigrants in general coming to this country and the contributions that we've made, but also will then willfully fight you down when you try to tell them. That's what annoys me, because you don't have to know everything, right?
Yeah.
We know that. Like, I don't know as much as I might want to know about the Chinese community in London or the Greek community in Birmingham or whatever. So everybody cannot know everything, and I don't think I ever have, as a Black person in this country, that expectation. But when we speak our truths out loud to this community, there is too much pushback on it.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
too much being told how we should feel about it. There's too many people who don't know anything about our history trying to tell us how we should feel about, how we should talk about, what we should be vexed about, what we should kneel for, what we should and shouldn't say, when they don't know what they're talking about. And so, as you can see, as I can imagine also from the group, I certainly feel very frustrated as a Black woman about that, which is why stories need to keep being told. But I just wonder what we can do also, kind of past my ranting about it, I wonder what we can do to encourage people's curiosity. Curiosity will always save us from the bitterness and from the vexation. It's like, I just want Britain to ask itself, why are you not curious about these people who are, the stereotype of people trying to get into your country?
Yes.
Just breathe that stereotype for a moment and ask yourself, even if that's true, why are people trying to get into your country? And the people who have been here before and got into your country, who are they really? I am tired. We need to move on from this now. So like you, Louise, I really do admire Olusoga because he is answering those questions and telling the story. Sorry, Yvonne, please go ahead.
No, sorry. I just thoughts running around my head as you're speaking. Didn't want to butt in. But yes, I think I so completely agree with you, Leone. And I think part of the problem is that our histories are not taught in school, apart from about, I think when white people see us in the streets, the only thing they know of is that we are the descendants of slaves. They don't. White people.
They don't even know about that. They don't even know very much about that.
They don't know their own histories. So of course they certainly don't know ours. And often, when I was a bit younger and a bit sort of more, on the nose, and people sort of say, "Well, why are you here?" I used to just say, "I'm here because you were there." That, simply, understand this. This is why I'm here, because you were there. You need to read, you need to understand. And here we are in 2021, and we're still struggling to get any kind of Black literature really on the school curriculum. So how are children supposed to know? They're coming out. Children are still coming out of school, not being taught. They're given they might be given one name. I had a Chinese family living with me for a short time, and the little boy, who is now only 8 years old, when he was 7, he came home with a project. He was doing something about Mary Seacole, and he asked me if I had anything, and I said, "Oh yes, I have stuff." So I gave him a great big book of Black people and on all the incredible things that Black people have invented and done. And this little boy was just amazed. He came back and said, "Yvonne, I didn't know that Black people did anything." He was 7, very intelligent little boy, and he. I have a feeling, I was looking around for the book the other day, the book might have gone with him. But I think it feels very frustrating still to be asked, why are you here? Still not to have our absolute histories understood, still to be reduced, a reductionist view of ourselves, still not to be, for people not to be told, for children not to be educated in what we did to build the countries of Europe. I was just
and then systems to be supported,
absolutely,
advantage us on the basis of that ignorance. I think that's what I mind. Individuals will learn what they learn, but this has systemic, economic, psychological effects that are real. So we're not just talking about, I want you to know my story because I'm an individual over here. No, it really has a huge effect on our communities and then on communities as a whole. No?
Absolutely. There's so much. People asking ludicrous questions like, how comes this community's come and that community's come and they've done so much better than your community? But there are also massive reasons for that. We know that it's not because Black people are lazy and do not want to work and do not want to own business and do not want. It's because of the structural and systematic racism. That is, Black people are held in, and the fear that is built up around us as communities, and still, the massive impact that we have had on the society is just not discussed. It's washed away. We in all the discourses, it seems to be a massive fight to keep us out of those discourses or to portray us in a particular way.
And how complex it is at every single level. So even what we were saying about the phenomenon of passing, speaking as a mixed race Black woman who sometimes, depends on who's looking at me, they're not quite sure what my background is, depending on the level of tan I have that day, right? But even the fact that we can get fascinated with a dynamic like that so much that we want to write about it, because the way that what we call colorism, I think everyone will understand what colorism is, but other listeners to us won't. But this is to do with all of those different gradations of shades of skin that happened as a result of intermixing over the years and all of the centuries, and the psychological and social implications of that. And
Yeah.
that's a thing that feels to me like very slave mind, that I will call slave mind, which is that it's slave thinking, it's colonial thinking to be comparing ourselves in this way, but that these attitudes are still active in 2021. There is still ideas about good hair and bad hair, ideas about, you know, you're having the right partner so that your children aren't too dark.
Absolutely.
These are still ideas that are going on. The idea that beauty is only associated with, you know, Eurocentric ideas of beauty. And so for me, I want to tell stories also that remind people that this is not just an effect that was something that happened 100 years ago. We're not playing the race card. It's something that has become this kind
ongoing.
of
It's ongoing.
you know, constant, you know, among us.
You know, I did a talk a while before the lockdown business in the city, which was really interesting. And I was asked to come and talk to a group of young business people, Black people who are working inside London City now. You know, they're bankers and traders and whatever they do. And it was really fascinating. They were talking about passing in an interesting sort of way. They were talking, you know, I was saying, gosh, you know, I came to this country when the only time you saw Black people in those buildings, of course, they're now very modernistic buildings, was cleaning their offices. And now, of course, these young people were there. But they were talking about how difficult it still is, and talking about having, for example, the Nigerians and African named people who were there, talking about having to change their names to even get through the door. Still, they say that they do not, you know, if they use their full African names, they do not get interviews. So they literally change their name to, you know, whatever it is, Paula Smith or whatever it is, to get there. And of course, again, that's a double-edged sword, because, you know, if we keep buying into this, you know, then how do we create the change? I see what they're trying to do. And also, it was really amazing how the girls had, you know, literally how they styled themselves. You know, they were, some of these girls, young women, were so made up. They kind of looked like they were made up by morticians almost. They were so, you know, it was bizarre. The whole thing was bizarre, and it's like they feel that they absolutely have to project a particular idea of beauty in order to be in these areas. And, you know, you just feel like you want to kick back and push back and, you know, at it, because if one feels that if you don't do that, then really you are buying into that idea that you can only be beautiful if you look like this. You can only be okay to be in the city if you have a name like this. So it is just so agonizing. That this fight is so agonizing. It's so long, and it's not going to significantly change, I think, in my generation. You know, but I want to see a generation that is all coming up that is also saying, no, we belong in the normal sphere. You know, we are here.
I think they're beginning to. Louise, forgive me, because I think you're younger than me.
Yes, Louise, yeah.
Do you feel that? Because in speaking
and Leanne?
Yeah.
Exactly. But, you know, we are the older generation in the room, Yvonne.
Yes.
But I wonder if you guys are feeling the young people coming up and making a shift, because I'm feeling that in teaching. I'm seeing, you know, students I've had 25 under, both Black and white and in between and whatever backgrounds, starting to have interesting and helpful conversations about race, the limitations of gender, and so on. So are you guys feeling that at all? Because, I mean, me and Yvonne can just cuss, but we've been cussing for a long time.
We've cussing for a long time. You can say COVID. Me cussing now. Yes, absolutely.
Give us some light, please, Louise, I beg you.
I mean, I worked in travel most of my life, so it was actually just a very white-centric industry, and there were 3 Black people in my office by the time I left. I wasn't the only one, which I was when I started, so I guess there was moderate progress. But I mean, yeah, I think it is it's definitely something that I struggled leaving university. I definitely struggled going through the graduate process where you have to like go to assessment centers and then jump through hoops and go for like 4 interviews in one day. It's a bit like doing The Apprentice, but in one day. So I definitely had a few issues in those, people's expectations of me, or because obviously I've got quite a white sounding name, and then I show up and sometimes people wouldn't hide their surprise. So I mean, sometimes, yeah, the name changing thing, it can bite you back, because then people are like, feel like you've misrepresented yourself, dupe them into giving you an interview.
Lose the hair.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like to think that things are getting better, but I think there's still improvements to be made.
Yeah. It's slow progress, isn't it? I mean, my students I find that my students are having better conversations now than my students 5 years ago were having, for example.
Fantastic.
Yeah, which is great. It means that more people are kind of open to talking about things like race, and not just talking about race in the American context as well. We're able to talk about it in the British context, which is really important. But then you get things like that government commissioned race report, which tries to
don't even go there.
I'm going to go there and then I'm going to move on, right?
That was unbelievable. That was unbelievable.
Right, which tried to rebrand Caribbean slavery as an experience, like it was some sort of tourist trap or something. That's all I'm going to say, right? Just to say that, yes, progress, but also that we have there is a long way to
go.
I really want the audience, however, to feel the collective disgust from that point.
That was, I mean, that was unbelievable.
I mean, it's why language and stories and pushing back on information is so important.
Well, there was a massive pushback, and rightly so, a massive pushback. That was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it was completely unbelievable. And you had asked the question, Leone, about how. You had asked the question, Leone, about what we can do to kind of encourage people's curiosity, right, in order to want to engage with different parts of history and different stories and different narratives. And I think that actually all 3 of your books does that in such different ways, right? It's given us, they're so beautifully written, they're so immersive that you're in the story, and before you know it, you're in the story, and you're getting this kind of this narrative that we haven't seen. And it's really interesting hearing all of you kind of talk about why these kind of, that there are so many different untold Windrush stories, or untold stories from different generations in Black British history, in Caribbean history. And I think just the fact that there's also so much kind of psychologically and in terms of kind of inherited trauma that we need to unpack, right? And I think that this comes out in all of your books again, this notion of trying to sort of unpick some of those legacies of trauma. So again, like 3 really different books, but also kind of engaging with really similar themes. I wanted to ask about your book, in fact, Leone. So Yvonne's novel is set between Jamaica and England. Louise's is set firmly in London. Your novel is set in this fictional archipelago of Poppy Show. And fictional though it is undeniably Caribbean, right? Like, I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, you said you wanted to base it in Carriacou, and you said that, and now I'm just like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. Because Carriacou is everything to me, ask anybody, right? But I was interested, I guess, in why you decided why a fictional place, and then what's I guess the process of creating that fictional world as well.
I mean, I will struggle to be clear on this, but I'll do my best, because it is something I feel strongly. I just sometimes I lack the language. It's a feeling like this. I feel like I have a responsibility still as an author to chronicle authenticity and truth. Yes. And yet, I think in around the 2000s, start of the 2000s, that also began to feel like something I wanted to have more control over. So if I wrote about London and I wrote about Black people in London, I had to write, it felt to me, don't know that this is true, but it felt to me that then I had to get everything right for my community.
Mm-hmm.
And if I wrote about Jamaica, I had to get everything right for my community. And I remember, again, I was moving closer to other genres and so on. I thought, how can I have some fun? Not abandoning, as you can hear, we're all quite politicized and involved in our communities. But so how can I have some fun? Because also, it's like Yvonne says, it's not just misery, you know? So then I thought, okay, if I create a land that is based within Caribbean sensibility, particularly Jamaica, what I was saying to you, Leanne, is that I would have liked to actually go back to Carriacou, which is somewhere I spent a little time when I was a child, to use that as a basis for the community. But I couldn't afford it at the time, so I went to the Isles instead, which is an archipelago on the end of England. Anyway, the point being this: I found myself in a position where I thought, then let me create a community. And truthfully, the way I thought about it is, good, I can leave that crap out, I can leave that crap out, I can leave that trauma out, and I can leave that trauma out. And I can choose the traumas I want to deal with, which in this case is both the complexity of love gone wrong, but also addiction in particular, which is one of the themes in the book. My protagonist in the book is addicted to hallucinogenic moths, the insect. And so perhaps it's quite telling that I was so overwhelmed with the complexity of all our traumas that I felt like I had to create a whole new world in which I could pick and choose the traumas and then control everything. And I guess that's the best I can say in terms of that approach. I also wanted it to be joyful. I did, as I said, ways that colonialism was kind of making its way in, but largely this is an untouched community who have kept, people away from them, outsiders away from them. Nobody comes into their island. They are there being themselves. And one of the things that Black people in particular, not just Black people, but Black people in particular have come to me and said of this novel, thank you for the joy. Thank you for the joy. Thank you for making us magical and beautiful, and we're nyam food, and we're batty big, and we feel nice, and we're in our place, and we are not affected by this crap from outside. Kind of was the
wonderful. Definitely can't wait to read it.
Well, I hope you like it, my dear. But
I'm sure I love it.
The thing is, so it's not a country that is not imperfect. It's flawed. There are all kinds of problems going on. Particularly, there's a big old whack of homophobia going on throughout the community. There's misogyny and so on. But I think it's really telling that I had to pick my traumas. And for me, at this time in my writing life, it felt doable, but also fun to have the freedom of actually leaving a lot of our history and our present pain behind in order to concentrate. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but that's how I was feeling about it. And one of the things, I think this is a really important point, actually, so I'll reiterate it. The relief with which Black readers are coming to me and going, thank you for the joy, kind of didn't occur to me as I was going through. I was just allowing myself to be joyful, crying on me who I don't know, saying thank you for the joy. Thank you for allowing us just to fall in love and dance and have a beauty contest and feel nice and be in the sea, not in some kind of tourist trap way of, we're all being exotic, but like deep joy and knowledge of the self. And so in the end, that's become something that is, I mean, the book's only been out for a couple of months. It's giving me immense joy to have done that, even not purposefully, but it's been a nice present for me, for people.
I kind of want to comment on what you just said about the joy, and I love that, because I think one of the things that have been removed from us as a people is our right to be normal, to just be normal, to get out of our beds, to go about our business and just feel normal, because there's no coming, and which is one of the, I think Erna goes back to Jamaica, and she talks about, I think this, what it feels like to wake up in a place full of people who look like her and feel normal. And I think that's so important, because I think so much at the time, so much about time, it feels like we're running on empty because of all these things that are going on around us. And I think it's just lovely to have that space, like when you're dancing, when we start dancing and we really get into a bit of reggae or whatever it is, and then we just floating. We don't know ourselves. We're just having fun. And I think that's a lovely metaphor. I think that's beautiful.
And I really relate to what you're saying, Yvonne, particularly in the following context. Being born here, and my mum then, my mother is in the mix. My mother's the black woman. My mother's Jamaican. And my mother already saw, because I was only 6, saw that I was beginning to get the teasing and the zebra, what are you? And she just said, I just can't. I mean, my mother's probably maybe one level lighter than you, Yvonne, so she's a dark-skinned black woman. She's like, I just can't. Let me just take her back to Jamaica and just fling her among black people and let her sort herself out. And yes, you know, then there was the complexity of colorism. But the best thing in life she ever did,
take it back to Jamaica.
Yes, you take me back to Jamaica for that long period of time, because of course it's where you grow up in your early years, the formative years, is so important.
Incredible.
Nobody can tell me I'm not black, you know.
Exactly.
Nobody can tell me I don't belong somewhere.
That's right.
There isn't somewhere that I can go home, even though we know the Caribbean is full of, you know, post-colonial problems and economic problems. I still know that, just as you said, there's somewhere I can go home and wake up and go, You know, that we often come across with. I've had many Jamaicans say to me, many Caribbean people say to me, they didn't know they were black till they came here.
Yeah.
And what they meant is not that they didn't know they were black, that's ridiculous, but it wasn't a thing like that.
No.
So they got here. And
it wasn't that you were not good enough. It wasn't that you did not, in Jamaica, I think I play with that in the book a lot, where everybody has a nickname, you know. So if you're black skin like me, you're going to be Blackie or something like that, you know. But I mean, it wasn't telling you. That wasn't saying to you, you're not good enough. I think there were some subliminal messages. I think we must get away from that. But it wasn't the sort of, thing that you get here where you're just not normal. I was thinking that my daughter, she's just come home from America. She's decided to, bring her family home. One of the reasons she's brought her family home, again, her children are on another level of, light colorness. And, New York, where she lives in Manhattan, I mean, New York changed their borders so that, white children go to schools full of white children, and black children go to school full of black children. So the danger, she was desperately worried about this danger of her children growing up in a city where they just see, black women and black women as nannies who look after.
Yes, exactly my mother's issue. Exactly. See, this is the thing. My mother was having these issues 40-something years ago.
Yes.
Your daughter is now having this issue now.
Absolutely. So she brought them back and she put them in the local schools here, where every other person is a different color. And so yes, I mean the messages that have still been given to children. And with recent events, with the Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd, which symbolizes the death of so many black men and black women through violence from the police and authorities and all kinds of things. It really brings to the fore, how delicate a balance we still live, and also permission. Let's not even run away from the fact that some very nasty things have been happening on our streets again and coming out of people's mouth because politicians are saying them, and it's like that people have been given permission. We really didn't like those people after all, and now we can say it. And we can be quite free about it.
Because after all, the Prime Minister thinks so.
Absolutely. And our voices, as I think you said, Leone, at the beginning, has again that our voices have been squashed, by not, like you've talked about it enough. It's done now. It's not, in the old days when we were growing up, I might be older than you as well. It was, you've got a chip on your shoulder. I remember writing a little poem about that. Now it's like, why are you still talking about this? You have jobs, you drive cars, some of you even have houses, what
you write book. I mean, what could we possibly
you write book? What's wrong with you? But what they don't understand, and I'm sure all of you women feel the same, is that, in a way you hurt one of us, and I think it's always been there, and you hurt all of us. I remember as a teenager walking down the high street, and when I heard a young person being attacked or heard of the death of another, I felt it right here, right in my, the other day somebody came to pick up some books from my house and told me, want me to sign a book for a friend. I said, oh, I recognize that name. And I said, I know that person. And she said, oh, haven't you heard? And it was another one of those ghastly stories. And I just stood up and I just burst into floods of tears like a small child, thinking, how many more of our young people must we lose on the street, of these cities, simply because of the color of their skin, even when they apparently are doing it to each other. But one of the reasons is that it's been allowed to happen. You imagine.
Yes,
you imagine young white people got killed on a city street in this country in over 4 weeks. What would happen? It wouldn't be allowed to happen. So so these conversations happen.
I agree with you, Yvonne, and I just think we probably all feel this way. I really would like, if there are people who are listening to this for whom this feels strange or unfamiliar, to just take a breath and start looking at systems that also, by the way, disadvantage all of us.
Yeah,
there are it disadvantages working class communities. These we are complaining about working class white communities. It disadvantages LGBT people, etc. I think it's time for us really, and it perhaps feels to me like the world is beginning to wake up to this, that they have always, they being those who are in power, done the divide and conquer thing very well indeed.
Completely.
Very well indeed. And it is still working. And those people in this country who are white, who have a genuine reason to feel frustrated by the systems around them, without work and all of the disadvantages that are there also for poor people, who are then told once again, oh no, but look at the darkies over there, look at the others, the different from us. I really do think that it's time for us to understand that that is a joke. That is a game that is being played on all of us. And this disadvantages everyone. Yeah, man, and it's time to really,
those people who are not being affected,
get a clue about that.
And all of us.
Yeah. Okay, this is our call to action.
Look, no panel's complete without one, right? I mean, I think it's really interesting that the conversation has just naturally come to this point, and I think it reiterates this notion that joy is just so important. I mean, there are moments where joy feels revolutionary. It really, really does. And I remember reading your book, Leone, and at these moments where you're describing these magical powers that these people have. The first time that someone's gift is described, I was like, oh my gosh. I just was so happy.
What would yours be? What would your magic be?
I don't know. I feel like I would have a really kind of useless power.
Tell me what?
Just like being able to grow weeds or something like that. Just something really is not going to help anyone, but it's mine.
Yours.
And I love it anyway.
If you have any magic power, Louise, what would your magic power be?
I kind of like the food thing. Yeah. Especially because I spent most of my time in my flat for the last year and just trying to think of more imaginative things to cook. I want to cook every day. That's been really useful during the pandemic.
Yeah. And Yvonne, what is your magic power, or what would it be?
My magic power would be completely selfish.
Go for it. What is it?
I cannot swim. I can't swim. I did go and take lessons in Wales some years ago, and I actually learned. But when I got back, I developed, whilst I was learning, I developed some dreadful things all over my body. My body started kind of rotting off almost. It turned out that I'm allergic to the stuff in the pools. What do you call it?
Chlorine. You're allergic to chlorine.
Really desperately allergic.
Oh, wow.
So of course I came back from having learned and paying a lot of money and couldn't use the pools. And people say, well, just go and swim in the lakes and stuff like that. I'm like, the lakes haven't got any bottom. I'm Jamaican, please. There's no handlebars. So my magic power would be to be able to dive into the sea or into a lake and just go for it.
I love that. What would yours be, Leone?
I mean, I can be corny, but it's true. And maybe I have it already. I want to have the magic ability to have people read my work and cry. And a lot of people be calling me Untamed and Balls, so otherwise,
yeah.
I quite like the idea of actually living my magic and being okay to being able to claim it. You know, it's like, oh, I can do that thing. That's good.
I was being interviewed by the Americans last night, and I was last night or the night before, I think.
The Americans, you know.
And the lady she was lovely, and she said, you know, Yvonne, she said, no, I probably shouldn't say that, but she said, your book made me laugh out loud in so many places. And she said, but your book is supposed to be serious. And I said, no, serious. She said, but it's seriously funny as well. I said, that's the idea. I said, I also wanted to read this book and have people not disappear into sort of, you know, under their pillow and cry. I want them to enjoy in the book. So yes, I like that idea. Joy.
Yeah, I think there's just these beautiful kind of magical moments of joy in all of these books, and it's really interesting that you talk about kind of needing to pick traumas to deal with, and indeed all three of these books are looking at trauma. They're looking at a variety of traumatic events, but I just think it's so important that we have these moments of magic, right? And the magic is joy.
The magic is present in us already and does not just rely on changing systems. We don't have to wait for economics to change I don't know, for me, it's like touching flowers and leaves and playing with the tea and, you know, hugging your friend. And, you know, magic is around us. And I mean, I think people would think that was corny. But it's true. It's true. And we should let ourselves go, oh my God, look at the sky.
Absolutely.
Look at your face, how your face is different from my face. Look at how your backside is different from my backside. I mean, these things, we should allow ourselves awe and wonder and, like, you know, I think it's good for the soul. And I think certainly it's one of my cope strategies for the crap, which I also see.
Absolutely. It's a bit like that saying that heaven is here, right here on earth. And it is, in exactly all those things you just say, in the beauty of plants, and the beauty of people, and the beauty of our environment, you know, all kinds of things. You know, so sometimes while people, I think you're busy waiting to be escorted somewhere into the unknown, you're missing all the joy that actually is around you. And I think it's really important for us. I think that's why we have survived as a people, because we have learned, you know, along the way, and we've always had it, to actually have joy in our lives, to really bring joy into our lives and enjoy. I love to laugh, for example. I love to laugh. And when pandemic or whatever it is, what's going on, I was writing my book like Louise. I was down in my little office upstairs, and every day I spoke patois to two friends, Jamaican friends, one in Harrow, one in Toronto, and we just had hysterics. You know, because, you know, we just talked all kinds of rubbish completely, and, you know, sort of I came up with all kinds of mad jokes. You think we were all traveling comedians or something, but we had a great time just laughing and just enjoy life and the fun that is there to be, you know. And I think, we'll never be allow ourselves to be subsumed by the narrative that other people try to tell about us, because we know very much who we are, and we must continue to know that.
Yeah, it's nice to be reminded of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that joy is a perfect place to wrap up this conversation. So I just wanted to again say so much thanks to Louise, Leone, and Yvonne for joining us for this panel. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your books as well. They have been a pleasure. I've just enjoyed getting into all of them so much. And if our viewers haven't had a chance to read or pick up the books, I urge you now to go and buy all of these books, please. It's good for you.
I'm certainly off to the bookshop, because I
don't go to your book, so I'm now going to start reading. I'm going to have to go to the bookshop. I haven't
bought Leone yet, and I haven't heard. I know of Leone's, but I hadn't heard of yours before, Louise. But my bookshop is at the end of my road.
Yes, go there right now.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Before it closes, yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for both of you. It's so lovely to meet you, and Leanne, thank you so much.
It's lovely to meet you too.
And of course to Bradford, thank you very much indeed for giving us
And
this space.
all of you. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Leone, and thank you, Louise. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.